The blizzard had been raging for 3 weeks, and Jonah Mallory stood on his porch, watching the world disappear into white. His mail-order bride should have arrived 21 days ago. The stagecoach came, but she didn't. No explanation, no body, just nothing. Every instinct screamed that Evelyn Hart was out there, somewhere in that frozen hell, waiting for someone to care enough to find her. His son begged him not to go. The town called him a fool. But Jonah saddled his horse anyway, because some promises you keep even when they kill you. Before we begin, drop a comment below telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now, let me tell you about the cowboy who rode into death itself for a woman he'd never met. The wind cut through the Colorado Valley like 1,000 frozen knives, turning the world into a blur of white and gray that stretched from earth to sky without mercy or end. Jonah Mallory stood at the edge of his porch, one gloved hand gripping the rough-hewn rail his father had built 30 years before, and stared into the storm that had stolen everything he'd allowed himself to hope for. 21 days. 21 days since the stagecoach was supposed to bring Evelyn Hart to Silver Ridge. 21 days since he'd stood in this exact spot, wearing his cleanest shirt, his hair slicked back with water from the well, his hands shaking like a schoolboy's as he waited for a woman he knew only through carefully written letters that smelled of lavender and promises. The coach had arrived on schedule that day. He'd watched it roll into town through sheets of early snow, his heart hammering so hard he thought his ribs might crack. He'd waited as the driver climbed down, as the door swung open, as passengers emerged one by one into the bitter cold. But Evelyn Hart had not been among them. "No bride for Mallory," the driver had said, consulting his manifest with gloved fingers that left smudges on the paper. "Just these 4. Maybe she missed the connection in Denver. Maybe she changed her mind. Women do that sometimes, you know. Get scared. Decide the frontier ain't for them after all." Maybe she changed her mind. Those words had echoed in Jonah's head for 3 weeks now, rattling around in the empty spaces where hope used to live. He told himself 100 different stories to explain her absence. She'd gotten cold feet. She'd met someone else. She'd taken one look at the photographs he'd sent, his weathered face, his hard eyes, his rough hands, and decided she deserved better than a widowed rancher with a struggling spread and a son who barely spoke. But something in his gut refused to believe it. Something whispered that Evelyn Hart hadn't abandoned him, that something had gone wrong, that she was out there somewhere, waiting, hoping, maybe even dying while he stood on his porch like a coward and let the world convince him she simply hadn't wanted him enough. "Pa?" Jonah turned to find his son standing in the doorway, 10 years old and already carrying the weight of too much loss in eyes that looked too much like his mother's. Toby had Sarah's gray eyes, her fine features, her quiet way of watching the world. Sometimes it hurt to look at him. Sometimes it was the only thing that kept Jonah breathing. "What is it, son?" "You're doing it again." Toby stepped out onto the porch, letting the door slam behind him. He wasn't wearing a coat, and his breath came out in white clouds that the wind tore apart and scattered. Staring at the snow like you can see through it. Just thinking about her. It wasn't a question. Toby had asked about Evelyn every day for the first week, then every few days. Now he just watched his father with those knowing eyes and said nothing, but the questions hung in the air between them anyway. Where is she? Why didn't she come? Did she even exist? Are you going to stop hoping? "Yeah," Jonah admitted. "About her." Toby moved to stand beside him at the rail, his small shoulder barely reaching Jonah's elbow. For a long moment they stood together in silence, watching the storm devour the world. "Mr. Patterson says the passes are closed," Toby said finally. "Says nothing's getting through until spring. Says anyone caught out there is already dead." Josiah Patterson owned the general store and considered himself the voice of reason in Silver Ridge. He'd said a lot of things about Jonah's situation over the past 3 weeks, most of them variations on the theme of foolishness and false hope. "Mr. Patterson says a lot of things. He says you're going to freeze to death if you go out there looking for a woman who probably never even got on the coach in the first place." Jonah looked down at his son. "What do you think?" Toby was quiet for a long time, his small face serious in the gray light. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible over the wind. I think Ma would want you to try." The words hit Jonah like a fist to the chest. Sarah had been gone 3 years now, taken by a fever that had swept through the valley like wildfire, and Toby rarely spoke of her. Jonah had thought maybe the boy had forgotten, or pushed the memories down so deep they couldn't hurt anymore. But here was the truth, raw and bleeding. His son remembered everything. "Your ma would probably call me 7 kinds of fool," Jonah said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Maybe." Toby looked up at him, and there was something fierce in his young face, something that reminded Jonah of Sarah in her final hours, when she'd gripped his hand and made him promise to keep living, to find happiness again, to not let her death be the end of everything good. But she'd still want you to go, because that's what you do when you love someone. You don't give up, even when it's stupid, even when everyone says it's impossible. Jonah felt something crack open inside his chest, some wall he'd been building since the moment the empty stagecoach had rolled away and left him standing alone in the snow. "I don't even know her, Toby." "You know her letters. You know what she wrote. You know she said yes when you asked her to come all this way." Toby's voice was getting stronger now, more certain. "And you know that something feels wrong. I can see it in your face. You think she's out there, don't you? You think something happened." Jonah closed his eyes. The letters. God, the letters. 6 months of correspondence that had started as a practical arrangement, a widower looking for help with his household, a woman in Boston looking to escape circumstances she'd never fully explained, and had become something else entirely. Evelyn's letters had been different from the start, not flowery or romantic, but honest, real. She'd written about her love of reading, her frustration with a society that treated unmarried women of 30 as burdens or curiosities, her dreams of open spaces and meaningful work. She'd asked questions about his life that no one else had ever thought to ask. What did the stars look like over his ranch? What did Toby like to eat for breakfast? What was the hardest part of his day? And slowly, carefully, Jonah had found himself writing back with the same honesty. He told her about Sarah, about the grief that still ambushed him at unexpected moments, about his fears that he was failing as a father. He'd described the way the aspens turned gold in autumn, the sound of cattle moving through high meadows, the particular quality of silence that existed only in deep winter. Their letters had become longer, more frequent, more necessary. By the time Jonah had finally worked up the courage to ask if she'd consider coming to Colorado as his wife, he'd already been half in love with the woman whose words had brought warmth back into his frozen world. And when she'd written back with a single word, yes, followed by 3 pages explaining that she'd been hoping he'd ask, that she'd already started packing, that she couldn't wait to meet Toby and see the ranch and start their life together, Jonah had allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, he deserved a second chance at happiness. Now she was gone, lost somewhere in the storm. Or worse. "I think something happened," Jonah said quietly, opening his eyes to stare back into the white emptiness. "I think the coach ran into trouble. I think she's out there, probably scared, maybe hurt. And I think I'm the only one who's going to go looking. When are you leaving?" "Tomorrow at first light." Toby nodded as if he'd expected this answer. "I'm coming with you." "The hell you are." "Pa." "No." Jonah turned to face his son fully, putting every ounce of authority into his voice. "You're staying here with Mrs. Chen. You're going to keep up with your lessons. You're going to feed the horses and check the cattle in the near pasture. You're going to be safe." "And what if you don't come back?" The question hung between them, terrible and honest. What if Jonah rode out into that storm and never returned? What if Patterson was right, and this was nothing but a fool's errand that would leave Toby orphaned and alone? But Jonah had made his decision. He'd made it the moment the empty coach had rolled away. He'd just been too afraid to act on it until now. "I'll come back," he said firmly. "I promise you, Toby. I'll come back, and I'll bring her with me." "You can't promise that." "I can promise I'll try. That's all any of us can do." Jonah put his hand on his son's shoulder, feeling how thin the boy had gotten over the long winter. "But I need to know you're safe. I need to know that no matter what happens out there, you're here, warm and fed and looked after. Can you give me that?" Toby's jaw worked, and for a moment Jonah thought the boy might cry. But then he straightened his shoulders and nodded, and Jonah saw Sarah again in the determined set of his features. I can give you that. Good. Jonah pulled his son close, holding him tight against his chest. Good boy. They stood that way for a long moment, father and son, while the storm raged around them and the future stretched out uncertain and terrifying. Finally, Toby pulled back. You really think you can find her? Jonah looked out at the endless white, at the mountains barely visible through the snow, at the miles and miles of wilderness that could hide 1,000 secrets and never give them up. I have to, he said simply. The rest of the day passed in a blur of preparation. Jonah went through his supplies with the methodical precision of a man who knew exactly how thin the margin for error would be. Extra blankets, dried meat and hardtack, matches wrapped in oilcloth, a flask of whiskey for medicinal purposes, rope, a hatchet, ammunition for his rifle. Mrs. Chen arrived as the sun was setting, a tiny Chinese woman who'd been running the boarding house in town since her husband had died in a mining accident 5 years back. She took one look at Jonah's preparations and shook her head. You are being very foolish, Mr. Mallory. So I've been told. The storm is too strong. The cold is too deep. You will die out there. Maybe. And then what happens to the boy? Jonah paused in his packing to look at her. Mrs. Chen was barely 5 feet tall and probably weighed less than 100 pounds soaking wet, but her dark eyes could cut through steel when she wanted them to. If I die, he'll have you, and the town. He'll be taken care of. He will be an orphan. He's already half an orphan, and if I don't go, if I just let her disappear without even trying to find her, what kind of man does that make me? What kind of father? Jonah shoved a bundle of jerky into his saddlebag with more force than necessary. I can't teach my son that it's okay to give up on people when things get hard. I can't teach him that promises don't matter when they become inconvenient. Mrs. Chen was quiet for a long moment. Then she sighed, a sound like wind through winter branches. She must be a very special woman, this bride who never came. She is. You have never met her. I know her. Jonah tapped his chest, right over his heart. I know her here. And I know she wouldn't just abandon me. Something happened. I feel it. Mrs. Chen studied him with those sharp eyes, and Jonah had the uncomfortable sensation of being weighed and measured by forces he didn't fully understand. Very well, she said finally. I will keep the boys safe. But Mr. Mallory, you must promise me something in return. What's that? If you find her, if this woman is real and alive and everything you hope, you must not waste the gift. You must not take for granted what the universe has given you. Her voice softened, became almost gentle. Second chances are rare. Most people never get them. If you are fortunate enough to receive one, you must honor it with everything you have. Jonah swallowed hard. I will. I promise. She nodded, satisfied. Then she turned and went inside to start preparing dinner for Toby, leaving Jonah alone in the gathering darkness. That night, Jonah lay awake in his bed, listening to the wind howl around the corners of the house and trying not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. He could freeze to death. His horse could break a leg. He could ride for days and find nothing. He could find Evelyn's body, frozen and lifeless. Or he could find her alive. That was the thought he held on to as he finally drifted into uneasy sleep. The image of Evelyn Hart, a woman he'd never seen, whose face he could only imagine from the careful descriptions in her letters, waiting somewhere in the frozen wilderness for someone to care enough to find her. He would be that someone. He had to be. Dawn came cold and pale, the sun a distant blur behind layers of cloud that promised more snow before the day was through. Jonah rose before first light, dressed in every warm thing he owned, and went to saddle his horse. Ranger was a big bay gelding, 15 hands and strong as an ox, with a temperament that bordered on stubborn. He'd carried Jonah through everything the mountains could throw at them over the past 8 years, and if any horse could survive the journey ahead, it was him. We're going on a trip, old friend, Jonah murmured as he tightened the cinch. Going to be cold, going to be hard, but I need you to hold together for me, just a little longer. Ranger snorted and tossed his head, his breath steaming in the frigid air. Toby appeared in the barn doorway as Jonah was securing the last of his gear. The boy's face was pale and pinched with worry, but he didn't cry, didn't beg Jonah to stay, just walked over and wrapped his arms around his father's waist, holding on tight. "Be careful, Pa." "I will." "And come home." "I will." With her. Jonah pulled back enough to look down at his son. "What makes you so sure she's out there?" Toby managed a small smile. "Because you're sure. And you're never wrong about the important stuff." Jonah felt his throat tighten. He pulled Toby close again, pressing a kiss to the top of his head. "I love you, son. Don't you ever forget that." "I love you too, Pa." They held each other for another moment, and then Jonah forced himself to let go. If he didn't leave now, he might lose his nerve entirely. He swung up into the saddle, settled his rifle across his lap, and looked down at the small figure standing in the snow. 2 weeks, he said. "If I'm not back in 2 weeks, you tell Mr. Patterson to send someone after me." Toby nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Jonah touched the brim of his hat in farewell, then turned Ranger toward the north and the waiting storm. Behind him, he heard Toby's voice, small but fierce in the morning air. "Bring her home, Pa. Bring her home." Then, the first day was hell. The wind came from the north like something alive and malicious, driving snow into every exposed inch of skin until Jonah's face felt like it was being flayed. The temperature dropped steadily as he climbed into the high country, falling from brutally cold to something beyond comprehension, a cold that made his lungs burn with every breath and his fingers go numb inside their gloves. Ranger plowed forward with grim determination, his massive shoulders breaking trail through drifts that sometimes reached his chest. Jonah had wrapped the horse's legs in cloth to prevent snow buildup, but he could feel the animal's strength flagging as the hours wore on. They followed the stage route north toward the pass, the road barely visible beneath its blanket of white. Jonah knew this country well, had ridden it 100 times in better weather, but now it was transformed into something alien and hostile, a landscape where familiar landmarks disappeared and distance became meaningless. By midday, the snow was falling so thick Jonah could barely see Ranger's ears. He'd wrapped a scarf around his face until only his eyes were exposed, but even that wasn't enough to keep the cold from seeping in, from settling into his bones and whispering that this was madness, that Patterson had been right, that he should turn back while he still could. But he didn't turn back. He thought about Evelyn's letters instead, the way she'd described growing up in Boston, the youngest daughter of a family that had once been prosperous but had fallen on hard times after her father's death, the way she'd talked about feeling trapped by expectations, by the limited roles available to unmarried women of a certain age, the quiet desperation in her words when she'd written, "Sometimes I feel like I'm drowning in silk and propriety, and all I want is to breathe clean air and do something that matters." He thought about the letter where she'd asked what kind of mother she might be to Toby, her words careful and vulnerable. "I've never had children of my own. I don't know if I'll be any good at it, but I want to try. I want to be the kind of person he can count on." He thought about the last letter he'd received, the one that had arrived a week before she was supposed to, the one he'd read so many times the paper had started to wear thin along the folds. "Dear Jonah, by the time you read this, I'll be on my way to you. I'm terrified. I'm thrilled. I'm convinced I'm making the best decision of my life, and simultaneously certain I'm making the worst mistake imaginable. But I'm coming anyway, because sometimes the scariest thing and the right thing are the same thing. I want you to know that whatever happens, whatever our life together looks like, I'm grateful. Grateful that you took a chance on a stranger. Grateful that you shared your words and your heart. Grateful that somewhere in this vast and often cruel world, there's a man who thinks I might be worth the risk. I'll see you soon. I promise. Yours, Evelyn. I promise." Those were the words that kept Jonah moving forward as the day grew darker and the cold grew worse. She'd promised. And he believed, God help him, he believed that she'd tried to keep that promise, that something beyond her control had prevented her from reaching him, that she was out there somewhere, maybe thinking he'd given up on her, maybe wondering if anyone cared enough to look. Well, he cared. He cared enough to ride into hell itself, if that's what it took. Night fell with terrifying speed, the gray afternoon giving way to a darkness so complete it felt like drowning. Jonah had planned to make it to the way station at Willow Creek by nightfall, but the storm had slowed him down more than he'd anticipated. Now he was somewhere in the high country with no shelter in sight and a horse that was reaching the end of its endurance. "Come on, Ranger," he muttered, scanning the darkness for any sign of refuge. "Just a little farther." But even as he said it, he knew they couldn't go much farther. Ranger was stumbling now, his breath coming in labored gasps. Push him much harder and the horse would collapse, and then they'd both die. Jonah's hands were so numb he could barely feel the reins. His feet might as well have been blocks of ice in his stirrups. The cold had moved past pain into something worse, a creeping numbness that whispered of frostbite and death. He was about to admit defeat, to start looking for any kind of windbreak where they might wait out the night, when he saw it, a dark shape against the white, barely visible through the driving snow. A building. Jonah urged Ranger toward it, hope flaring bright and desperate in his chest. As they drew closer, he recognized the outline of one of the old line shacks that dotted the high country, rough shelters built for ranchers caught out in bad weather. This one was barely more than 4 walls and a roof, but it might as well have been a palace. He practically fell out of the saddle, his legs so stiff with cold they barely held him. Working with numb fingers, he managed to get the door open and lead Ranger inside. The shack was tiny, maybe 12 feet square, with a dirt floor and gaps in the walls where the chinking had fallen out. But it blocked the wind, and that was enough. Jonah unsaddled Ranger with shaking hands, rubbing the horse down as best he could with a blanket. Then he piled all his remaining blankets in the corner, crawled underneath them, and let the darkness take him. He woke to gray light filtering through the cracks in the walls and the sound of Ranger shifting restlessly. Every muscle in Jonah's body screamed as he sat up, and his hands were so stiff he could barely make them work. But he was alive. They were both alive, and they had miles to go yet. The storm had eased during the night, the wind dying to a whisper and the snow falling in lazy flakes instead of the horizontal assault of the day before. Jonah gnawed on some jerky and hardtack, forced himself to drink from his canteen even though the water was so cold it made his teeth ache, and stepped outside to assess the situation. The world was buried. Snow lay thick and deep in every direction, transforming the landscape into rolling dunes of white that buried everything familiar. The stage road had completely disappeared, and Jonah had to rely on the position of the distant mountains to guess at his direction. He'd hoped to reach the pass by the end of the second day, but he could see now that was impossible. The snow was too deep, the going too slow. It might take twice as long as he'd planned. Maybe longer. How long could someone survive out here? The question gnawed at him as he saddled Ranger and prepared to push on. If Evelyn had been caught in this storm, if she'd been out in the open with inadequate shelter. No, he couldn't think like that. Couldn't let doubt poison his determination. She was alive. She had to be alive. He mounted up and urged Ranger forward into the white wilderness, following the ghosts of landmarks he could barely see, trusting instinct and memory and stubborn hope. The second day was worse than the first. The temperature had dropped even further, and the snow that had seemed merciful in the morning gave way to another vicious storm by afternoon. Visibility dropped to nothing. Ranger struggled through drifts that sometimes reached the bottom of Jonah's stirrups. More than once, Jonah had to dismount and break trail on foot, his legs burning with effort, his lungs screaming for air that didn't feel like knives. But he kept going. He thought about Evelyn, imagined her voice, though he'd never heard it, imagined her face, though he'd never seen it, imagined her waiting somewhere in all this terrible white, holding on by sheer force of will because she believed someone would come. "I'm coming," he thought with every step. "Hold on, I'm coming." By the time darkness fell again, Jonah had no idea where he was. All sense of direction had been swallowed by the storm. He might be miles from the road, might be riding in circles, might be heading deeper into the wilderness instead of toward civilization. But still he rode because stopping meant dying, and dying meant failing her. It was Ranger who saved them that night. The horse suddenly stopped, ears pricked forward, and refused to move. Jonah squinted into the darkness and saw it. Another shack, almost invisible against the trees, its outline barely distinguishable from shadow. This one was in better condition than the first, with a small stove and a pile of firewood someone had left for emergencies just like this. Jonah got a fire going with shaking hands, unsaddled Ranger, and collapsed beside the stove. He would rest, just for a few hours. Then he would keep going. He had to keep going. Because somewhere out there, Evelyn Hart was waiting for someone to care enough not to give up, and Jonah Mallory would be damned if he let her down. Dawn of the third day broke pale and cold, the sun a distant memory behind endless gray. Jonah woke with frost in his beard and pain radiating through every joint. His fingers had gone past numb into something worse, a wooden stiffness that made gripping the reins an act of pure will. But the storm had finally broken, leaving behind a world so white and still it hurt to look at. He fed Ranger the last of the grain, checked the horse's legs for signs of injury, and stepped outside into crystalline silence. The air was so cold it burned going down, turning each breath into a conscious decision to keep living. But visibility had improved, and in the distance Jonah could make out the distinctive shape of Eagle Peak, which meant the pass was close, maybe 5 miles, maybe less, which meant the stagecoach route was close too. Jonah's heart kicked hard against his ribs. If the coach had run into trouble, it would have happened somewhere near the pass. That's where the road was most treacherous, where storms hit hardest, where help was furthest away. He mounted Ranger and turned toward the mountains, his breath coming faster now. Not from exertion, from hope. The dangerous, devastating kind of hope that could break a man if it turned out to be wrong. The sun climbed higher as they rode, and the temperature rose just enough to make the cold bearable instead of lethal. Jonah unwrapped the scarf from his face and scanned the landscape with increasing urgency. Every dark shape in the distance made his pulse spike. Every shadow could be a coach, could be a body, could be her. It was just past noon when Ranger suddenly shied, snorting and tossing his head. Jonah reined him in and looked down. Tracks. Not animal tracks, wheel ruts, mostly buried but still visible where the wind had scoured the snow thin. The stage road. Jonah's hands were shaking as he turned Ranger to follow the tracks north. The ruts led upward through a narrow defile where pine trees crowded close on both sides. This was the approach to the pass, the last brutal climb before the road crested and started its descent toward the valley beyond. And there, maybe a quarter-mile ahead, something massive and dark rose from the snow like the skeleton of some great beast. The stagecoach. Jonah kicked Ranger into a stumbling trot, his heart hammering so hard he thought it might burst through his chest. As they drew closer, the wreckage became clear. The coach had left the road and crashed into a stand of pines, probably thrown there by wind or panic. The impact had torn off one wheel and shattered the driver's box. Snow had buried everything up to the window line, but Jonah could see where someone had dug out the door. He dismounted before Ranger had fully stopped, plunging through snow up to his thighs to reach the coach. His hands found the door handle, wrenched it open. Inside was empty. Seats torn apart, luggage scattered, blood frozen on the floor, but no bodies. Jonah's breath came out in a white cloud that hung in the still air. Empty was good. Empty meant the passengers had gotten out, meant they'd survived the crash. But where had they gone? He circled the wreckage looking for clues, found a trail, mostly buried but still visible, leading east into the trees. Multiple sets of footprints, some large, some small. Someone had organized the survivors, led them away from the wreck. Smart. The coach would have been a death trap in this cold, with no protection from the wind. But where would they go? Jonah stood still, forcing his racing mind to think. East meant away from the road, deeper into the wilderness. Why would anyone go that way unless they knew something he didn't? Unless they knew there was shelter in that direction? A cabin. A mine. Something. Of course, the old trapper's cabin at Blackwood Creek. Jonah had forgotten about it. The place had been abandoned for years, but it was maybe 3 miles east of the pass. Far enough to be a hard trek in good weather, brutal in a storm. But if someone in the group had known about it, had remembered it, it would have been their best chance. Jonah grabbed Ranger's reins and started following the trail. The tracks led through dense forest where snow had accumulated in massive drifts between the trees. Whoever had broken this trail had done it at terrible cost. Jonah could see where people had fallen, struggled up again, staggered forward. Could see where someone had been dragged for a stretch, their heels leaving furrows in the snow. His throat was tight. How many had made it? How many had died trying? Was Evelyn among the living or the dead? The question drove him forward with increasing desperation. Ranger struggled through the deep snow, grunting with effort, but Jonah kept pushing, following the ghostly trail through a forest so silent it felt like the whole world had died and left them alone in its corpse. And then, through the trees ahead, he saw smoke. Thin and gray against the white sky, almost invisible. But smoke meant fire. Fire meant people. Fire meant hope. Jonah's exhaustion vanished in a surge of adrenaline. He crashed through the last 100 yards of forest and burst into a clearing where a small log cabin sat half buried in snow. Smoke rose from the chimney. Footprints marked the snow around the door. Someone was alive in there. He tied Ranger to a tree and stumbled to the door, his numb fist pounding on the weathered wood. "Hello? Anyone inside?" Silence. Then the sound of movement, whispered voices, urgent and afraid. "I'm not here to hurt anyone," Jonah called, trying to keep his voice steady. "My name is Jonah Mallory. I'm looking for someone. A woman, Evelyn Hart. She was supposed to be on the stage from Denver 3 weeks ago." More whispers. Then the scrape of a bar being lifted. The door opened a crack, and a man's face appeared in the gap, weathered and suspicious, with eyes that had seen too much. He held a rifle pointed at Jonah's chest. "How do we know you're who you say you are?" "You don't, but I've been riding for 3 days through hell to get here, and I'm not leaving until I find out what happened to the people on that coach." Jonah met the man's eyes without flinching. "Please, I just need to know if she's alive." The man studied him for a long moment. Then something in his face softened, and he lowered the rifle. "Alive might be too strong a word for most of us, friend. But we're not dead yet." He pulled the door open wider. "Come in. You look like you're about 2 minutes from freezing solid." Jonah stepped into warmth that felt like a physical blow after days in the cold. The cabin was tiny and packed with people. Maybe a dozen of them, huddled around a fire that filled the single room with smoke and blessed heat. They looked up as he entered, faces gaunt with hunger and exposure, eyes hollow with trauma. And not one of them was Evelyn. Jonah's heart dropped through his stomach. The stage from Denver 3 weeks ago. Was there a woman named Evelyn Hart on board? A woman near the fire spoke up, her voice hoarse. She was maybe 50, with gray hair and a face lined with pain. "I was on that coach. There were 7 of us when we left Denver." "Was Evelyn one of them?" The woman's face crumpled. "Oh God, you're him. You're the rancher. She talked about you, showed us your letters." Jonah couldn't breathe. "Where is she?" "Gone." The woman's voice broke. "She's gone." The word hit Jonah like a bullet. Gone, dead, lost, all his hope, all his desperate writing, all his refusal to give up, for nothing. He'd failed her, arrived too late. Ooh, let her die alone in the snow while he'd... "She left yesterday morning," the man with the rifle said quietly. "On foot, trying to reach you." Jonah's head snapped up. "What?" "We told her it was suicide, told her to wait for the storm to break, for help to come. But she wouldn't listen." The man shook his head. "Said she'd made a promise. Said you'd be waiting for her, worrying, and she couldn't stand the thought of you thinking she'd abandoned you. So she took what supplies we could spare and headed west." "Yesterday morning," Jonah repeated, his mind racing. "How long before the storm hit?" "Maybe an hour, 2 at most." Horror flooded through Jonah. Evelyn had walked out of this cabin straight into the worst of the storm. The same storm that had nearly killed him, even mounted on a strong horse with proper gear. She would have been on foot, exhausted, probably already weakened from the initial crash and days of exposure. She couldn't have survived, could she? Which way did she go? The gray-haired woman pointed west. She had a compass, said she'd follow it straight toward Silver Ridge. We tried to tell her it was impossible, that she'd never make it, but she just smiled and said, her voice caught, "She said you'd come looking for her if she didn't show up, that you weren't the kind of man who broke promises." Jonah's throat was so tight he could barely speak. "How long ago? Exactly?" "Maybe 28 hours, 30 at most." 30 hours in that storm. 30 hours in cold that could kill in minutes. The rational part of Jonah's brain said she was already dead. Had to be dead. No one could survive that long exposed. But the part of him that had ridden 3 days through hell wasn't rational. That part was already moving toward the door. "You're going after her." It wasn't a question. "I'm going after her. Friend, I don't mean to be cruel, but she's gone. The storm that hit yesterday was the worst we've seen. Nothing could have survived out in that." Jonah turned back to face the man, and something in his expression must have been fierce because the man took a step backward. "She's not gone until I find her body, and even then," Jonah's voice shook. "Even then, I'm bringing her home. She deserves that much. She deserves to be laid to rest proper, not left frozen in the snow like she never mattered." The gray-haired woman stood up, wincing as her legs protested. "I have something." "Wait." She limped to the corner and retrieved a small bundle wrapped in cloth. "She left this. Said if she didn't make it, to give it to you if you came looking." Jonah took the bundle with shaking hands. Inside was a book, the collected works of Whitman that Evelyn had mentioned in her letters, the pages worn soft with reading. And tucked inside was a piece of paper covered in familiar handwriting. His hands shook harder as he unfolded it. "Jonah, if you're reading this, I failed to keep my promise. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I tried. I swear I tried. The coach crashed 2 weeks ago. Most of us survived, made it to this cabin, but we're running out of food and hope. No one knows we're here. No one is coming. I realized today that I can't wait any longer, that if I stay, I'll die slowly watching these people starve. And more than that, I can't bear the thought of you waiting for me, not knowing what happened, maybe thinking I changed my mind. I know this is probably foolish. The others certainly think so. But I'd rather die trying to reach you than live knowing I gave up. Does that make sense? Probably not. But it's the truth. I want you to know that these past 6 months, writing to you, learning about your life, daring to imagine a future together, they've been the happiest of my life. You made me believe I could be brave, could be wanted, could be worth someone's effort. If I don't make it, please don't blame yourself. Live, love your son, find happiness. You deserve all the good things this world has to offer. And if by some miracle I do make it, if I'm standing on your porch when you get home, frozen and exhausted but alive, I hope you'll forgive me for scaring you like this. Either way, thank you for seeing me, for wanting me, for being exactly who you were in your letters. Yours, whether I make it or not, Evelyn. Jonah read the letter 3 times before he could see through the tears. When he finally looked up, everyone in the cabin was watching him. "I'm going to find her," he said, his voice rough. "And if any of you want to survive, you need to send someone down to Silver Ridge. Tell them where you are. Tell them to send help and supplies." "How?" the rifleman asked. "We barely have strength to keep the fire going, let alone hike 15 miles through deep snow." "I'll send someone back from Silver Ridge. Give me 2 days. 3 at most." Jonah folded the letter carefully and tucked it inside his coat, close to his heart. "But right now, I need to know everything about where she went. Every detail you remember, every word she said." The gray-haired woman stepped forward. "She headed due west, straight toward the pass, said she'd follow the ridgeline down to avoid the worst of the drifts. She had a coat, a blanket, some jerky, not nearly enough, but it was all we could spare." "How was she? Her health? Her strength?" The woman hesitated. "Weak. We've all been weak, but she was determined. I've never seen anyone so determined." "Did she say anything else?" "Yes." The woman's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "She said if you came looking, to tell you she was sorry for the trouble, and that she'd wait for you." The words hit Jonah like a blow. She'd wait for him, even dying in the snow. She'd believed he'd come, and he would. God help him, he would find her if he had to search every inch of this mountain. Jonah turned back to the door, but the rifleman caught his arm. "Take this." He pressed something into Jonah's hand, a small silver flask. "Whiskey. Might save her life if you find her alive. Might save yours if you don't." Jonah nodded, unable to speak. Then he stepped back out into the cold and untied Ranger. The horse looked as exhausted as Jonah felt, but there was no choice, no time for rest. Every minute that passed was another minute Evelyn was out there alone. If she was still alive at all. Jonah mounted up and turned west, toward the pass, toward the wilderness, toward the woman who'd walked into death rather than break her promise. "Hold on," he thought desperately. "Please, Evelyn, hold on. I'm coming." The trail was almost invisible, just the faintest disturbance in the snow, already half filled by wind and fresh powder. But Jonah followed it with single-minded focus, his eyes scanning every drift, every shadow, every possible place a person might have sought shelter. The afternoon stretched long and terrible. The sun moved across the sky without warmth, just a pale disk behind clouds that promised more snow. Ranger stumbled with exhaustion but kept going, responding to the desperation in Jonah's hands, in his voice. "Come on, boy. Just a little more. We're close. I can feel it." But could he? Or was he lying to himself, chasing false hope through a frozen wasteland? No. He refused to believe that, refused to accept that he'd come this far only to fail. The ridge Evelyn had mentioned became visible as they climbed, a long spine of rock and scattered pines that ran west toward the valley. Smart. The ridge would have been less buried than the low areas, easier to traverse, but it was also exposed, offering no shelter from wind or snow. Jonah urged Ranger up the slope, his eyes burning from squinting against the glare. The tracks were clear here, protected somewhat by the rocks. He could see where she'd walked, where she'd stumbled, where she'd fallen and gotten back up. His heart clenched. She'd been so close. So damn close to making it. And then the tracks disappeared. Jonah reined in Ranger, his breath catching. One moment the footprints were there, clear and purposeful. The next, nothing. Just unmarked snow stretching in every direction. No, 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 no. Jonah dismounted and walked forward on foot, searching desperately for any sign. Had the wind erased the trail? Had she turned aside? Fallen? He was about to start searching in a wider circle when something caught his eye. A slight depression in the snow about 50 yards downslope. Not quite a drift, not quite a shadow, but not quite nothing either. Jonah's heart began to hammer as he plunged down the slope, his legs sinking deep with every step. The depression became clearer as he approached. A shape, too regular to be natural, too still to be alive. Oh God. Jonah fell to his knees beside it and started digging with his bare hands, throwing snow in every direction, his breath coming in ragged gasps that had nothing to do with exertion. His hands hit fabric, a coat. He dug faster, uncovering shoulders, a head, hair dark with ice. "No, no, please, God, no!" He cleared the snow from her face, and his heart stopped. Evelyn. She was so pale she looked carved from marble, her skin blue-white in the fading light. Ice crusted her eyelashes, her lips. She wasn't moving, wasn't breathing that he could see. Jonah tore off his gloves and pressed shaking fingers to her throat, searching desperately for a pulse. Nothing. He waited, counting seconds, barely breathing himself. Still nothing. "No." The word tore out of him, raw and broken. "No, you don't get to die. Not like this. Not when I finally found you." He grabbed her shoulders, shook her gently. "Evelyn. Evelyn, can you hear me? It's Jonah. I'm here. I came for you just like you said I would. So you need to wake up now. You need to—" A breath, so faint he almost missed it. Just the slightest movement of her chest beneath the frozen coat. She was alive. Barely, impossibly, miraculously alive. Jonah's hands were shaking so hard he could barely function, but he forced himself to think, to remember everything he knew about cold exposure. Get her warm, get her moving. Don't warm her too fast or her heart might stop. He pulled the blanket from his pack and wrapped it around her, then lifted her in his arms. She weighed almost nothing, and the realization of how close to death she was made his throat close. Ranger stood where Jonah had left him, head down with exhaustion. There was no way the horse could carry both of them, not in this snow, not after 3 days of brutal riding, which meant Jonah would walk. He adjusted his grip on Evelyn, holding her close against his chest, and started down the ridge toward the tree line. His legs screamed with every step. His arms burned. But he didn't stop. Couldn't stop, because he could feel her breathing against his chest now. Shallow, labored, but there. Life hanging on by a thread. "Stay with me," he murmured against her frozen hair. Stay with me, Evelyn. We're not done yet. You and me, we're just getting started. The sun was setting by the time he reached the trees, painting the snow gold and pink, beautiful and deadly. Jonah's vision was starting to blur with exhaustion, his body running on nothing but will and terror. He needed shelter, fire, warmth, the line shack. There had to be another line shack somewhere in this area. The ranchers built them every few miles, insurance against exactly this kind of emergency. Jonah staggered forward, his eyes scanning the darkening forest. There. Maybe a quarter-mile ahead, a darker shadow among the pines that might be man-made. He didn't remember covering that last quarter-mile. One moment he was walking, the next he was kicking open a door and stumbling into a small cabin barely bigger than a shed. But it had walls, a roof, a tiny stove. Jonah laid Evelyn carefully on the floor and turned to the stove with shaking hands. Please let there be wood. Please let there be... Yes. A small pile in the corner, dry and ready. Jonah grabbed it, stuffed it into the stove, struck a match with fingers he could no longer feel. The flame caught, grew, began to radiate blessed heat into the frozen space. Jonah turned back to Evelyn and his heart nearly stopped again. In the flickering light, she looked dead. Her skin was too pale, too still. Her lips were blue. No, you're not dying, not after everything we've been through. He knelt beside her and began stripping off her frozen clothes, his hands clumsy but driven. The coat came off stiff with ice. Her dress beneath was soaked through and frozen solid. Her boots were blocks of ice around her feet. Jonah worked methodically, fighting panic, until she was wrapped in every blanket he had, wearing his dry shirt over her frozen chemise. Then he positioned her close to the stove, close enough to warm, but not so close she'd heat too fast, and began rubbing circulation back into her hands and feet. Her fingers were like ice beneath his palms. No response to his touch. No movement. Come on, Evelyn. Come back to me. You walked through hell to get here. Don't you dare give up now. He rubbed harder, willing warmth and life back into her frozen limbs. Minutes passed. The stove crackled and heat filled the small space, but Evelyn remained terrifyingly still. Jonah's chest was tight with panic he couldn't afford to feel. He forced it down, kept working. Hands, feet, arms, legs, methodical circles, friction, and warmth. I got your letter, he said, his voice breaking. The one you left at the cabin. And I need you to know, you didn't fail. You hear me? You kept your promise. You tried. That's all any of us can do. Still no response. Jonah grabbed the flask the rifleman had given him, uncapped it with shaking hands, and carefully tilted a tiny amount of whiskey between her blue lips. Swallow, please, Evelyn. Just swallow. For a long, terrible moment, nothing happened. Then her throat worked. Just the smallest movement. But movement. Jonah nearly sobbed with relief. That's it. That's my girl, again. Another tiny sip, another swallow. And then, so quiet he almost missed it, a sound, a whimper, a breath that caught and turned into something almost like consciousness. Jonah leaned closer, his heart in his throat. Evelyn, can you hear me? Her eyelids fluttered. Didn't open, but fluttered. That's it. Come on back. I've got you. You're safe now. Her lips moved, forming words he couldn't hear. Jonah bent closer until his ear was almost touching her mouth. Knew you'd come. The words were barely a whisper, slurred with cold and exhaustion. But they were hers. Real and alive. And everything. Jonah pulled back to look at her face. Her eyes were open now, just barely, just slits of gray that held recognition and relief, and something that made his heart stutter. I knew you'd come, she whispered again, her voice like broken glass. Told them. I'm here, Jonah said roughly, taking her frozen hand in both of his. I'm here, and I've got you, and you're going to be fine. You hear me? You're going to be fine. A ghost of a smile touched her blue lips. Stubborn. Cowboy. And then she was crying, or trying to, dry sobs that shook her whole body, but produced no tears because she was too dehydrated, too frozen. Jonah gathered her carefully into his arms, held her close while she shook and gasped and gradually, slowly, began to thaw. "I've got you," he murmured into her hair. "I've got you, Evelyn. You're safe. You're home." She trembled in his arms for what felt like hours, her body fighting its way back from the edge of death with painful slowness. Jonah held her close to the stove, feeding the fire with one hand while keeping her wrapped tight against his chest with the other. Every few minutes he'd tilt the flask to her lips, coaxing tiny sips of whiskey past her chattering teeth. "Easy," he murmured when she tried to drink too fast and choked. "Slow, just a little at a time." Her eyes stayed open now, fixed on his face with an intensity that made his breath catch. Even half frozen and barely conscious, there was intelligence in those gray eyes. Determination. The same fierce will that had driven her to walk into a blizzard rather than break a promise. "Your son," she whispered after a while, the words coming easier now, though still slurred. "Toby, is he—" "He's safe. Back at the ranch with Mrs. Chen, probably driving her crazy with worry about his fool father." "Not foolish." Her hand found his, fingers still cold but gaining strength. "You came." "Of course I came. What kind of man would I be if I didn't?" "A sensible one." That ghost of a smile again, stronger this time. "Like everyone said." Jonah shook his head, adjusting the blankets around her shoulders. Sensible men don't write love letters to women they've never met. Don't promise to build a life with a stranger. Don't ride 3 days through a storm that should have killed them. Love letters? Her eyebrows rose fractionally. "That what we were writing?" Heat flooded Jonah's face. That's not... I just meant..." "Good." She squeezed his hand weakly. "Because that's what I thought too. Afraid. I was imagining it." They looked at each other in the flickering firelight, and something passed between them that felt like recognition, like coming home to a place you'd never been but had always belonged. "I need to check your feet," Jonah said finally, his voice rough. "Frostbite can set in fast, and if we don't catch it—" "I know." She closed her eyes briefly. "Do what you need to do." Jonah carefully unwrapped her feet from the blankets, steeling himself for what he might find. Her toes were white and waxy, frighteningly cold to the touch. But when he pressed gently, testing for frozen tissue, she flinched. Pain was good. Pain meant nerve function, meant the tissue was still alive. He wrapped her feet in dry cloth and positioned them near the stove's warmth, then moved to check her hands. The fingers were in better shape. She must have kept them tucked inside her coat, but the tips were still dangerously pale. "This is going to hurt," he warned. "As they warm up, the pain will get worse before it gets better." Had worse. But her jaw was already clenching against the first waves of returning sensation. Jonah worked methodically, massaging circulation back into her extremities while the fire crackled and night pressed close around their tiny shelter. Outside, the wind had picked up again, moaning through the pines like something alive and hungry. But inside they had warmth, had light, had each other. As the minutes passed and color slowly returned to Evelyn's skin, Jonah found himself studying her face properly for the first time. She wasn't beautiful in the conventional sense. Her features were too strong for that, her jaw too determined, her nose too prominent. But there was character in every line, intelligence in those gray eyes, and a mouth that looked like it smiled easily when it wasn't blue with cold. She looked exactly like her letters. Direct, honest, real. "You're staring," she said without opening her eyes, though a smile tugged at her lips. "Sorry, just trying to match the face to the words." "And? Do I measure up to 6 months of imagination? You're alive. That's all that matters right now." Her eyes opened and the smile faded. "I'm sorry for scaring you, for making you come all this way, for—" "Stop." Jonah's voice came out sharper than he'd intended. "Don't you dare apologize for surviving, for fighting, for being brave enough to walk through hell because you didn't want me to worry. It was foolish. It was the most courageous thing I've ever heard of anyone doing." He took both her hands in his, willing her to understand. "You could have stayed in that cabin, could have waited for rescue that might never come, could have given up. But you didn't. You kept your promise, even when it meant risking everything. That's not foolish, Evelyn. That's... His voice cracked. That's extraordinary. Tears welled in her eyes, real ones this time, now that her body had enough moisture to produce them. I couldn't stand the thought of you waiting, not knowing. Maybe thinking I'd changed my mind about us. I never thought that. Not once. Truly? Truly. I knew something had gone wrong, knew you were in trouble. Jonah had to stop, had to swallow hard against the tightness in his throat. I was so afraid I'd be too late, that I'd find you, but you'd be... I'm not. She squeezed his hands with surprising strength. I'm here. We're here. Together. Just like we planned. They sat in silence for a while, hands clasped, the magnitude of what had almost happened settling over them like snow. Evelyn had come within minutes of death. Maybe seconds. If Jonah had given up even an hour earlier, had turned back at any point, she would have died alone in the snow, and he never would have known what they might have been to each other. The thought made him feel sick. Tell me about Toby, Evelyn said eventually, her voice stronger now as warmth continued to seep back into her body. Your letters were full of him, but I want to know more. What does he look like? What makes him laugh? Jonah felt something loosen in his chest at the question. Of course she'd think of Toby. Of course that would be where her mind went once the immediate crisis had passed. He looks like his mother, same gray eyes, same serious way of looking at the world. Gets that little crease between his eyebrows when he's thinking hard about something. Jonah smiled despite everything. He's quiet. Too quiet sometimes. Lost Sarah when he was 7, and I think he's been afraid to love too hard since then. Afraid of losing someone else. That's why you wanted a wife, not just for help around the ranch. He needs a mother, needs someone who can give him the kind of care I can't. The gentleness, Jonah struggled for words. I can teach him to ride and rope and survive out here, but I can't teach him that it's okay to be soft sometimes, to be vulnerable, to let people in. And you think I can? I think you walked into a blizzard because you didn't want a stranger to worry about you. Yeah, Evelyn, I think you can teach him that kind of caring. She was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was thick with emotion. What if I'm not good at it? What if I've never been a mother, never even been around children much. What if I fail him? You won't. You can't know that. I know you tried to reach me even when it meant dying. I know you thought about Toby in that moment, about what he'd need, what he'd want. That's already more than most people would do. Jonah lifted her hands to his lips, pressed a kiss to her cold fingers. You don't have to be perfect, Evelyn. You just have to show up. Keep showing up. That's all any of us can do. Is that what you've been doing? For him? Trying to. Some days better than others. Jonah's throat was tight again. Some days I wake up and I still see Sarah everywhere, hear her voice. Expect her to walk through the door with that smile that could light up a room. And I think, how am I supposed to do this? How am I supposed to raise this boy alone when I can barely remember to feed myself? But you do it anyway. Because he needs me. Because I promised Sarah I'd take care of him. Because Jonah had to stop, had to breathe through the sudden, overwhelming wave of everything he'd been holding back. Because sometimes love means showing up even when you don't know what you're doing. Even when you're terrified you'll fail. Even when every instinct says to run. Evelyn's eyes were bright with unshed tears. Is that why you came looking for me? Love? The question hung between them, huge and terrifying. They'd never said the word before. Not directly, not in all those careful letters. They talked around it, implied it, felt it growing in the spaces between words. But neither had been brave enough to name it, until now. Jonah looked at this woman he'd known for 6 months through ink and paper, 3 days through desperation and snow, and maybe an hour through actual physical presence. By any reasonable measure, he should say no, should call it duty or honor or simple human decency. But he'd stopped being reasonable the moment he'd saddled Ranger and ridden into a storm that should have killed him. Yeah, he said quietly. Love. I fell in love with your words first, your mind, your spirit, and now. He touched her face gently, his calloused fingers rough against her cold skin. Now I'm falling in love with you, the real you, the woman brave enough to walk through hell because she didn't want to break a promise. A tear slid down her cheek, and she turned her face to press a kiss to his palm. I've been in love with you since your letter about the stars. When you wrote about how they looked different here than in Boston, how they were brighter, closer, how sometimes you'd stand outside just to feel small in the best possible way. She smiled through her tears. That's when I knew you were someone who could see beauty in vastness instead of just emptiness, someone who could teach me to be brave. You didn't need teaching. You were already brave. No, I was desperate. There's a difference. She shifted in his arms, wincing as the movement sent fresh pain through her warming extremities. I came west because I had nothing left in Boston. No family who wanted me, no prospects, no future except slow suffocation in a world that didn't know what to do with women like me. Coming here, marrying you, it was an escape, a last resort. And now? Now it's a choice. She met his eyes steadily. I choose you, Jonah Mallory, not because I have to, not because there's nowhere else to go, but because in 6 months of letters, you showed me what it means to be truly seen, truly valued, and because you rode into death itself to find me. Jonah couldn't speak past the lump in his throat. He just pulled her closer, buried his face in her hair, and held on while the weight of the last 3 days finally crashed over him. He'd found her. Against all odds, against all reason, he'd found her alive. They stayed like that for a long time, wrapped in each other and firelight while the storm raged outside. Eventually, Evelyn's trembling eased and her breathing deepened, and Jonah realized she was falling asleep. Rest, he murmured against her hair. I've got you. Nothing's going to hurt you while I'm here. Promise? The word was drowsy, slurred with exhaustion. Promise. She sighed and let herself sink into sleep, trusting him completely, trusting that he'd keep watch, keep her safe, keep the darkness at bay. Jonah stayed awake through the night, feeding the fire, checking Evelyn's pulse and breathing, making sure color stayed in her skin and warmth in her hands. Every time she shifted or whimpered in her sleep, he was there with quiet words and gentle touches. Every time the wind howled particularly fierce, he held her a little tighter. Dawn came slowly, reluctantly, the darkness giving way to gray that filtered through gaps in the cabin walls. The storm had passed during the night, leaving behind a world buried so deep in snow it looked like a different planet. Evelyn stirred as light touched her face, her eyes fluttering open with confusion before memory returned and her gaze found Jonah's. You stayed up, she said, her voice rusty with sleep. All night. Had to make sure you kept breathing. I'm tougher than I look. I noticed. He smiled, brushing hair back from her face. How do you feel? Like I walked through a blizzard and nearly died. She tried to sit up and gasped as pain shot through her feet. Oh God, that's worse than yesterday. That's good, actually. Means the nerves are working. Means the tissue isn't dead. Jonah helped her settle back against the blankets. It's going to hurt for a while, but you'll heal. Will I lose anything? Toes? Fingers? Too early to tell, but I don't think so. You're young, strong. Your body wants to survive. He checked her feet carefully, looking for the telltale black of tissue death. But while they were blistered and painful, the skin was pink and warm. We got lucky. Another hour out there, and it would have been a different story. Evelyn closed her eyes briefly. Thank you for finding me. For everything. You already thanked me. Multiple times. You can stop now. I don't think I can. Don't think I'll ever be able to stop thanking you for... Evelyn. Jonah took her hand, his expression serious. You don't owe me gratitude. You don't owe me anything. I came because I wanted to. Because the thought of you out here alone was unbearable. Because He had to stop, had to find the right words. Because I love you. And love doesn't keep a ledger. Doesn't add up debts and obligations. It just shows up and does what needs doing. Her eyes were bright again. Where did you learn to talk like that? Sarah. She used to say, his voice caught. She used to say that love was a verb, not a feeling, that it was something you did, not something you had. And I didn't really understand what she meant until she got sick, and I had to keep loving her even when it hurt, even when it felt like dying, even when it's okay. Evelyn squeezed his hand. You don't have to explain. I want to. I need you to understand that loving you doesn't mean I've stopped loving her, that there's room in my heart for both, that Jonah. She reached up to touch his face, her fingers gentle on his bearded cheek. I never thought I was replacing her. I'm not trying to erase her or pretend she never existed. She was Toby's mother, your wife, the woman who taught you how to love. I could never compete with that, and I don't want to. Then what do you want? To write our own story, one that honors what came before while still being ours. She smiled softly. To be the next chapter, not a revision of the previous one. Jonah felt something shift in his chest, some weight he hadn't even known he was carrying finally lifting. You're remarkable. You know that? I'm half frozen and probably smell like a wet dog. Remarkable seems generous. You walked through a blizzard to keep a promise. Remarkable is the bare minimum. They shared a smile, and in that moment Jonah felt something slot into place. This was right. She was right, not despite everything they'd been through, but because of it. Because they'd both proven they were willing to show up even when it was hard, even when it hurt, even when every sensible voice said to quit. We should eat, he said finally. Get some food in you. Then we need to figure out how to get you to town. Town? You need a doctor. Need to make sure the frostbite heals properly. And, he hesitated, and there are people at that trapper's cabin who need help. I promised I'd send someone back for them. Evelyn's face went pale. Oh God, I forgot. The others, are they? They were alive when I left them yesterday, but they're weak, running out of supplies. We need to get help to them fast. Then we should go now. We should. You can barely stand. We're not going anywhere until you're strong enough to ride. Jonah, no arguments. Another few hours won't make the difference between life and death for them, but pushing you too hard could kill you. His voice was firm. We wait until you can move without screaming. Then we go. Together. She looked like she wanted to argue, but pain and exhaustion won out. She nodded reluctantly and let him help her eat some jerky and hardtack, washing it down with melted snow heated over the stove. As they ate, Jonah found himself studying her again. The way she moved even through pain. The way she thought of others before herself. The quiet strength that radiated from her even when she was at her weakest. What? She asked, catching him staring. Just thinking about how lucky I am. Lucky? You rode 3 days through a death storm and found you alive. Yeah, Evelyn, I'm the luckiest man in Colorado. She shook her head, but she was smiling. You're crazy. Probably. But you agreed to marry a crazy man, so what does that make you? Equally crazy, or desperate, or... Her smile faded. Jonah, I need to tell you something about why I left Boston, about what I was running from. His stomach tightened. You don't have to. I do. You deserve to know what you're getting, who you're getting. She took a breath, her hands trembling slightly. I wasn't just unmarried, there was a man, someone my family wanted me to marry. Someone with money and position and all the right connections. But you didn't want him. I hated him. He was cruel, controlling, the kind of man who smiled in public and showed his true face only in private. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were haunted. I said no, kept saying no. And my family, they said I was being selfish, foolish, that women like me didn't have the luxury of choice, that I should be grateful someone wanted me at all. Jonah's jaw clenched. They tried to force you. They tried. They pushed and pressured and made my life unbearable until I... She stopped, swallowed hard. Until I realized I had two choices. Marry him and slowly die inside. Or leave. Risk everything on the chance that somewhere in this big world there might be someone who'd want me for who I was instead of what I could provide. And you chose to leave. I saw your advertisement in the paper. Widowed rancher seeking wife. Practical, direct. No promises of romance or grand passion. Just partnership. Someone to help build a life. She met his eyes. And I thought, maybe that's enough. Maybe practical is what I need. So I wrote to you, expecting nothing, hoping for, God, I don't even know what I was hoping for. And I wrote back. And you wrote back. And you were kind, real. You didn't try to charm me or impress me. You just talked to me. Like I was a person. Like my thoughts mattered. Like I was worth listening to. Her voice cracked. Do you know how rare that is? How precious? Jonah reached for her hand. You deserve better than what they offered you in Boston. Maybe. Or maybe I'm just stubborn, unwilling to settle for a life that felt like dying. She squeezed his fingers. Either way, I want you to know I'm not running anymore. I'm choosing this, you, Toby. All of it. Not because it's my only option, but because it's what I want. Even after nearly freezing to death, a laugh broke through her tears. Especially after that, because you came. Because you cared enough to risk everything. Because you're sitting here telling me I'm remarkable when I look like something the cat dragged in. You are remarkable, frozen or not. They looked at each other, and Jonah felt the last of his reservations crumble. This woman, brave and broken and fierce, was his, and he was hers, not through some contract or practical arrangement, but through choice, through love earned in the hardest possible way. We should probably talk about the practical stuff, Evelyn said after a moment. About what happens next. About whether you still want to marry me. Now that you've met me. Seen me at my worst. This isn't your worst. I'm covered in frostbite and haven't bathed in 3 weeks. It's pretty close to worst. Your worst would be giving up, lying down in that snow and accepting death. This? He gestured at her battered but breathing form. This is you at your best, fighting, surviving. Refusing to quit even when quitting would have been easier. So, you still want to marry me? More than ever. Even though we barely know each other? We know the important things. We know we can count on each other. We know we're both stubborn enough to walk through storms. We know, he smiled. We know we write damn good letters. That surprised a laugh out of her. That we do. The rest, learning how you take your coffee, what makes you smile, all the little everyday things, that's what marriage is for. We'll figure it out as we go. What if we can't? What if we're terrible at living together? Then we'll be terrible together, but we won't give up. That's the promise. Not that it'll be easy, not that we won't fight or frustrate each other, just that we'll keep showing up, keep trying, keep loving each other? Yeah, that. Evelyn was quiet for a long moment, her eyes searching his face. Then she nodded, something settling in her expression. Okay, yes, let's do this. Let's get married properly, with witnesses and vows and all of it. Let's choose each other on purpose instead of just stumbling into it because we were both desperate and lonely. You sure? I walked through a blizzard for you, Jonah Mallory. I'm sure. He leaned forward and kissed her then, gentle and careful, tasting salt and snow and promise. Her lips were still chapped from the cold, her skin still too pale, but she was warm and alive in his, and that was everything. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Evelyn rested her forehead against his. Take me home, she whispered. Take me to Toby and your ranch and our life. I'm ready. Can you ride? I'll crawl if I have to, but I'm not spending another night in this shack. Her voice broke. I want to start our life, now, before anything else can go wrong. Jonah understood, the fear that this was all temporary, that fate would snatch away this happiness before they could claim it, that they'd survive the storm only to lose each other some other way. All right, he said, we'll go slow. Stop if you need to, but we'll get you home, I promise. I know you will. You keep your promises. She smiled, tired but genuine. It's one of the things I love about you. Getting Evelyn onto Ranger was an exercise in patience and pain. Every movement sent fresh agony through her damaged feet, and twice she had to stop and breathe through waves of nausea. But she gritted her teeth and let Jonah lift her into the saddle, her jaw set with the same determination that had carried her through the blizzard. Jonah mounted behind her, one arm wrapped firm around her waist to keep her steady. She sagged back against his chest, and he could feel how much strength the effort had cost her. Ready? He asked against her ear. As I'll ever be. They moved out into a world transformed by snow and sunlight. The storm had passed completely, leaving behind skies so blue they hurt to look at and air so clear every detail stood out sharp as broken glass. The beauty of it was almost obscene after so much death and darkness. Ranger picked his way carefully through the deep drifts, his breath steaming in the cold air. The journey that had taken Jonah hours to cover in desperate haste now stretched ahead of them slow and cautious. But Evelyn needed slow, needed the chance to rest against him, to let her body conserve what little strength it had left. They rode in silence for the first hour, both lost in their own thoughts. Jonah kept one eye on the landscape, watching for landmarks that would guide them toward Silver Ridge, and the other on Evelyn. She was holding herself too still, her breathing too controlled, trying not to show how much she was hurting. "Talk to me," he said finally. "Tell me something, anything. Take your mind off the pain." "Like what?" "Tell me about your favorite book. You mentioned Whitman in your letters, but what else do you read?" A small laugh escaped her. "You want to discuss literature while we're half frozen and lost in the mountains? We're not lost. And yes, I want to know. Want to know everything about you." She was quiet for a moment, then her voice came soft and a little dreamy. "Dickens, I love Dickens. The way he makes you care about people you'd normally walk past on the street. The way he shows that dignity and worth aren't about money or position." "Which one's your favorite?" "Great Expectations. The part where Pip realizes that being a gentleman isn't about having fine clothes and money, that he was better when he was just a blacksmith's apprentice who cared about people." She shifted slightly in the saddle. "I read that book when I was 16 and it changed something in me. Made me realize that the life my family wanted, all the propriety and status, it wasn't what made people worthy. It was how they treated each other when no one important was watching." "Is that why you said no to that man they wanted you to marry?" "Part of it. He was everything my family valued, wealthy, connected, respectable. But he was cruel to servants, dismissed women as decorative objects, talked about the poor like they were a different species." Her voice hardened. "And I thought, this is what respectability looks like. This is what I'm supposed to aspire to. No, thank you." Jonah pressed a kiss to her temple. "Your family were fools to try to force that on you. They were desperate. My father died in debt. We were living on the charity of relatives who resented having to support us. I was the only commodity we had left to trade." She paused. "I don't blame them anymore. They were trapped too, just in a different way. But I couldn't sacrifice myself to maintain a fiction. So you came west." "So I came west, to find something real, something honest, even if it was hard." She turned her head to look at him, her gray eyes serious. "You're the most honest person I've ever met, Jonah Mallory. Do you know that? I'm nothing special. You're wrong. Most people hide behind masks, say what they think others want to hear. But you told me the truth from the very first letter, about Sarah, about your struggles, about being afraid you weren't a good enough father. You didn't try to present some perfect version of yourself. Didn't see the point. You'd find out the truth eventually anyway." "Exactly. And that's what made me trust you, made me believe that maybe this crazy idea of marrying a stranger could actually work. Because you weren't a stranger, not really. You were just someone I hadn't met yet, but already knew." Jonah tightened his arm around her waist. "I felt the same way. Every letter you sent, I felt like I was coming home to someone I'd been missing without knowing it." They fell silent again, but it was a comfortable silence now. The kind that existed between people who didn't need to fill every moment with words. Ranger plodded steadily through the snow, and the sun climbed higher, bringing a little warmth to the frozen world. Around midday, they stopped to rest at a small creek where the water ran too fast to freeze. Jonah helped Evelyn down from the horse, steadying her when her legs nearly buckled beneath her. "I'm fine," she insisted through gritted teeth. "You're stubborn is what you are," said the man who rode 3 days through a death storm. Fair point. He got a fire going while Evelyn sat wrapped in blankets, her feet propped up to reduce the swelling. The blisters had worsened during the ride, and Jonah could see her biting back sounds of pain every time she shifted position. "Let me look," he said, kneeling beside her. "It's not that bad." "Evelyn." She sighed and let him unwrap the cloths around her feet. The sight made his stomach clench. The skin was angry red and blistered, some of the blisters already broken and weeping. But there was no black, no sign of tissue death. "It's healing," he said firmly, as much to convince himself as her. "Painful, but healing. We just need to keep it clean and protected." "Will I be able to walk again? Properly, I mean?" "Yes. It'll take time, but yes. You're young and strong and he looked up at her. "And too damn stubborn to let a little frostbite keep you down." That earned him a weak smile. "A little frostbite. You have a gift for understatement." "One of my many talents." He rebandaged her feet with clean cloth, then heated some snow for drinking water and shared out the last of their food. It wasn't much. Some jerky gone hard as leather, a few pieces of hardtack, but it was enough to keep them going. "Tell me about the ranch," Evelyn said as they ate. "I know you described it in your letters, but I want to hear it again. Want to picture where we're going." Jonah settled back against a tree, pulling her close against his side. "It's not much. About 300 acres in a valley between two ridges. Good grazing land, a creek that runs year-round. The house is small, just 4 rooms, but it's solid. My father built it to last. 4 rooms. That's more than I had in Boston." "You shared a house with family, though." "And 6 other families. Thin walls, no privacy, everyone always in everyone else's business." She closed her eyes, leaning her head on his shoulder. "I used to dream about space, about being able to walk outside and not see another person for miles, about silence that wasn't just the brief pause between arguments." "You'll have plenty of silence on the ranch, maybe too much. Winters can get lonely." "Not this winter. This winter I'll have you and Toby. That's the opposite of lonely." Jonah felt his throat tighten. "He's going to love you. Might take him a while to trust it, but once he does, you'll be his whole world." "What if I disappoint him?" "You won't. You don't know that. I know you walked through a blizzard to keep a promise. I know you're sitting here with feet that must feel like they're on fire, and you haven't complained once. I know." He turned to look at her. "I know that the same courage that brought you this far will carry you through whatever comes next." She was crying again, silent tears tracking down her cheeks. "I'm scared, Jonah, terrified. What if I'm not cut out for this? What if—" "Then we'll figure it out together. That's what marriage is. 2 people stumbling through life, catching each other when they fall. Is that what you and Sarah did?" The question was tentative, careful. She'd asked about Sarah before in her letters, but always indirectly, always leaving room for Jonah to deflect if he wanted to. "Yeah," he said quietly. "That's what we did. She was better at the catching than me, if I'm honest. Better at seeing when I was struggling. Better at knowing what to say to make things right. You must miss her terribly." "Every day. But it's different now than it was. The grief isn't as sharp. More like an old ache that flares up sometimes, but mostly just reminds me she was real. That what we had mattered." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "And I think she'd be glad that I found you, that I'm not spending the rest of my life alone and angry at the world for taking her." "You really think so?" "I know so. One of the last things she said to me was that I had to promise not to close myself off, not to let her death be the end of everything good in my life. She made me swear I'd find happiness again, even if it felt like betrayal." His voice roughened. "Took me 3 years to be able to even consider keeping that promise. And then your letter arrived. What changed? Why did you put that advertisement in the paper?" Jonah was quiet for a long moment, watching the fire crackle and smoke. "Toby, he asked me one night if I thought his mother would want him to be sad forever. And I realized I'd been teaching him that grief meant stopping, that loving someone meant staying frozen in the moment you lost them." He shook his head. "That wasn't what Sarah wanted for either of us. So I placed the ad, told myself it was practical, that I just needed help around the ranch. But really I was ready to try again, ready to believe that maybe there was still good left in the world. And you found me, and I found you, a Boston woman who quoted Whitman and Dickens and asked questions nobody else thought to ask. Like what? Like what the stars looked like what made me laugh, like whether I believed in second chances." He turned to face her fully. "That last one. That's when I knew. When you asked if I believed people could start over even after terrible loss. And I realized that's exactly what I was hoping for. What I needed. Evelyn's hand found his, their fingers intertwining. I asked because I needed to know if you were running from something or toward something. If you wanted a wife or just wanted to not be alone. What did my answer tell you? That you were one of the bravest people I'd ever encountered. Because it's easy to run. It's hard to stay open, to risk your heart again when you know exactly how much it can hurt to lose. She lifted their joined hands to her lips, pressed a kiss to his knuckles. You gave me hope that maybe I could be brave too. They sat together in the warm circle of firelight, holding each other against the cold and the fear and the uncertainty of everything ahead. The creek burbled nearby, and somewhere in the distance a raven called. Otherwise, the world was silent and still and theirs. Eventually, Jonas stirred. We should keep moving, want to make town before dark if we can. Evelyn nodded, though he could see the effort it took her to straighten up, to prepare herself for more pain. He helped her back onto Ranger, settled behind her again, and they resumed their careful progress through the snow. The afternoon wore on and the landscape began to change. The trees thinned out, giving way to open meadows buried under white. Jonah recognized landmarks now, that distinctive rock formation, that lightning-struck pine. They were getting close to Silver Ridge, maybe 2 hours, 3 at most. Almost there, he murmured against Evelyn's hair. Good, because I don't think I can... She stopped, her body going rigid. What? What's wrong? Nothing. Just, God, this is really happening, isn't it? I'm about to meet your son, meet your town, start being someone's wife and mother, and... Her breathing was coming faster now. What if they don't like me? What if I'm not what they expected? What if... Breathe, Evelyn. Just breathe. I can't. I can't do this. I'm not ready. I'm not... Hey. Jonah pulled Ranger to a stop and turned her gently to face him. Look at me. Look at me. Her eyes were wide with panic, her face pale. You've already survived the hardest part. The storm, the cold, the fear. Everything that comes next, meeting people, settling in, figuring out your place, that's nothing compared to what you've already endured. But what if I fail? What if I'm terrible at being a wife, at being a mother? Then you'll be terrible, and we'll love you anyway. Because that's what family does. We don't require perfection. We just require showing up. He cupped her face in his hands. You're already the woman I fell in love with. Nothing that happens next is going to change that. You promise? I promise. And I keep my promises. You said so yourself. She managed a shaky laugh. I did say that, didn't I? You did. So trust it. Trust me. Trust that whatever comes next, we'll face it together. Evelyn took a deep breath, then another. The panic slowly receded from her eyes, replaced by that familiar determination. Okay, let's do this. Let's do. They rode on, and as the sun began its descent toward the western peaks, the buildings of Silver Ridge came into view. It wasn't much of a town, maybe 20 structures scattered along a single muddy street, but to Jonah it looked like paradise, looked like home. People emerged from buildings as they rode past, drawn by the sight of a stranger. Jonah could see the questions in their faces, the curiosity mixed with concern. He probably looked like hell, several days of beard growth, clothes stiff with dirt and sweat, eyes hollow with exhaustion. And Evelyn looked worse, bundled in blankets with her frost-damaged face barely visible. Mallory? That was Josiah Patterson, stepping out from his general store with an expression of shock. My God, man, we thought you were dead. When you didn't come back, we assumed... His eyes went to Evelyn. This is Evelyn Hart, my bride. She needs a doctor. Jonah's voice was rough with exhaustion, but steady. And we need to send help back to Blackwood Creek. There are people stranded in the old trapper's cabin, maybe a dozen of them. They need supplies and rescue. Patterson was already moving, shouting orders to other men who'd gathered. Johnson, get Doc Morrison. Anderson, round up every able-bodied man and all the supplies we can spare. We're heading out within the hour. The town erupted into organized chaos. Jonah dismounted carefully and lifted Evelyn down, catching her when her legs buckled. She clung to him, her face pressed against his chest. So many people, she whispered. They're all staring. Let them stare. They're just curious and concerned. This is a good town, Evelyn, full of good people. A woman pushed through the crowd, Mrs. Chen, her face creased with relief and something that might have been tears. Mr. Mallory, you came back. I told the boy you would come back, but I was not certain I believed my own words. Where is he? Where's Toby? At the house. I did not bring him because I did not know what we would find. Did not want him to see. She stopped, her eyes going to Evelyn. But you found her. You actually found her. Mrs. Chen, this is Evelyn Hart. Evelyn, this is Mrs. Chen. She's been looking after Toby. Evelyn tried to straighten, tried to present herself properly despite everything. I'm pleased to meet you, Mrs. Chen. Thank you for taking care of him. Mrs. Chen studied her with those sharp, dark eyes, and Jonah held his breath. Mrs. Chen's opinion mattered. Her approval could make the transition so much easier. Finally, the old woman nodded. You have his eyes. Strong eyes, survivor's eyes. She turned to Jonah. The boy will be glad. He has been very brave, but very worried. I need to get Evelyn to the doctor first, then I'll… No. Evelyn's grip on his arm tightened. Toby first. He needs to know you're safe. Needs to see that you kept your promise. You can barely stand. I can stand long enough for this. Please, Jonah, let me meet him. Let me… Her voice dropped to something raw and vulnerable. Let me start being part of this family. Jonah looked at her, this woman who'd walked through hell and was still thinking of others first, and felt his heart crack open a little wider. All right, we'll go together. Mrs. Chen led them through town to a small boarding house at the far end. Jonah could see the curtain twitch in the front window, could imagine Toby's face pressed to the glass watching for his father. The door burst open before they reached it, and then Toby was flying down the steps, heedless of the snow and ice. Pa! Pa! You're back! You… He skidded to a stop, his eyes going wide as he took in Evelyn. Is that her? Is that… This is Evelyn. Jonah's voice was thick. I told you I'd bring her home. Toby stared at Evelyn with those serious gray eyes, and Jonah could see him taking in every detail. The frost-damaged skin, the obvious pain, the way she leaned on Jonah for support. The boy was quiet for a long moment, his face unreadable. Then he walked forward and looked up at Evelyn with devastating directness. Did my pa save your life? Evelyn blinked, clearly not expecting the question. Yes, he did. I would have died if he hadn't come. And did you really walk through a blizzard to get to us? I did. Why? Because I made a promise, and because… She glanced at Jonah, then back to Toby. Because I wanted to meet you, very much. Toby considered this, his small face serious. Then he nodded, something settling in his expression. Okay, you can stay then, if you want to. A laugh bubbled out of Evelyn, half sob, half joy. I want to, very much. Good. Toby looked at his father. Can we go home now? I want to show her the ranch and the horses and the place where the creek freezes and you can see all the way to the bottom. Not today, son. Evelyn needs to see the doctor first. Needs to rest. But soon, I promise. You keep your promises. Toby said it like an absolute truth, like the one thing in the world he was certain of. Always. The doctor's examination was thorough and painful. Evelyn bore it with gritted teeth and white-knuckled hands while Doc Morrison poked and prodded at her damaged feet. You're lucky, he said finally, sitting back. Another hour, and you'd have lost toes. Maybe more. As it is, you'll heal. It'll take time and it'll hurt like the devil, but you'll heal. How long before I can walk properly? Few weeks, maybe a month. You'll need to stay off your feet as much as possible, keep them clean and dry. Let the tissue repair itself. He looked at Jonah. She's going to need care, constant care. Someone to help her with everything until she's mobile again. She'll have it, Jonah said firmly, whatever she needs. Morrison nodded and began bandaging Evelyn's feet with clean cloth and salve. I'm going to give you laudanum for the pain. Use it sparingly, but use it. No point suffering when you don't have to. When he finished, Jonah carried Evelyn to Mrs. Chen's boarding house and up the stairs to a small, clean room. "This is yours," Mrs. Chen said, "until you are well enough to travel to the ranch. I will bring food, hot water for washing, clean clothes." She looked at Evelyn with surprising gentleness. "You rest now. You have earned it." After she left, Jonah settled Evelyn on the bed and sat beside her, suddenly at a loss. They'd spent days focused on survival, on reaching safety. Now that they were here, the reality of what came next began to sink in. "So," Evelyn said softly, "we made it. We made it. What happens now?" Jonah took her hand. "Now we rest. We heal. We let the town send help to those people at the cabin. And then," he paused, "and then we get married, properly, like you said, with witnesses and vows and all of it." "When?" "Whenever you're ready. A week, 2 weeks, however long you need." Evelyn was quiet for a moment, her thumb tracing circles on the back of his hand. "What if we didn't wait?" "What?" "What if we did it soon, tomorrow even, before anything else can go wrong? Before," her voice cracked, "before I wake up and find this was all a dream." "Evelyn, I know it sounds crazy. I know I can't even walk down an aisle. But I don't care about that. I want to be yours. Officially, legally, permanently. I want to belong somewhere, to someone. I want—" Jonah silenced her with a kiss, gentle but sure. When he pulled back, he was smiling. "Tomorrow, then. We'll have the Reverend come here. We'll say our vows in this room if we have to, but we'll do it right. We'll do it permanent." "You're sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." She smiled through tears, and Jonah felt something shift, some final piece falling into place. They'd survived the storm, survived death itself. Everything that came after would be a gift. "I love you," she whispered. "I don't think I've said that yet. Not clearly, but I do. I love you, Jonah Mallory. I love you too. Have since the letter about the stars." They held each other as darkness fell outside and the town settled into evening quiet. Tomorrow, they'd face the future. Tonight, they were just two people who'd found each other against impossible odds and refused to let go. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Morning came with pale sunlight streaming through the window and the sound of voices in the street below. Jonah had spent the night in a chair beside Evelyn's bed, unwilling to leave her even for the comfort of his own room. She'd woken several times through the night, disoriented and crying out from pain or nightmares, and each time he'd been there with gentle hands and quiet words until she settled again. Now she stirred as light touched her face, her eyes opening slowly. For a moment confusion clouded her features, then memory returned and she looked at Jonah with something like wonder. "You're still here. Where else would I be?" "I don't know. I half expected to wake up and find this was all—" She stopped, shook her head. "Never mind. You're here. That's what matters." A soft knock at the door interrupted them. Mrs. Chen entered, carrying a tray laden with breakfast, eggs, bacon, fresh bread still steaming, coffee that smelled like heaven. "You must eat," she said, setting the tray on the small table by the window. "Build strength? Today is an important day." "Today?" Evelyn looked at Jonah questioningly. "Our wedding day, if you still want to." Her face transformed, pain and exhaustion giving way to something radiant. "Yes. God, yes. I thought maybe you'd changed your mind. That in the light of day you'd realize how insane this all is. The only insane thing would be waiting any longer." Mrs. Chen made a small sound that might have been approval. "I will tell Reverend Parker. He will come at noon. That gives time for preparation." She looked at Evelyn critically. "And time for a proper bath. You cannot marry smelling like horse and snow." Evelyn laughed, the sound bright and free. "No, I suppose I can't." After they'd eaten, Mrs. Chen returned with 2 other women, wives of local ranchers whose names Jonah vaguely remembered. They shooed him out of the room with promises to make Evelyn presentable, leaving him to pace the hallway while female voices and occasional laughter drifted through the door. Toby found him there an hour later, dressed in his Sunday clothes and looking nervous. Is it really happening? Today? It is. How do you feel about that? The boy was quiet for a moment, his face serious. Is she going to be my new ma? The question hit Jonah square in the chest. He crouched down to Toby's level, looking his son in the eyes. She's going to be your stepmother. That doesn't replace your ma. Nothing could replace her. But Evelyn, she'll love you and take care of you and be there for you, if you'll let her. What if I can't? What if every time I look at her, I just think about ma being gone? Then we'll talk about it. We'll work through it together, all three of us. Jonah put his hands on Toby's shoulders. Your ma wanted you to be happy, wanted both of us to be happy. And I think Evelyn can help us find that again. But only if you're willing to give her a chance. Toby's eyes were bright with unshed tears. She seems nice, and she was brave. You said brave people are worth knowing. I did say that, and she is. One of the bravest people I've ever met. Okay. Toby took a deep breath, squaring his small shoulders. Okay, I'll try. For you, and for Ma. That's all I'm asking, son. Just try. They hugged, and Jonah felt his throat tighten. His boy was growing up, learning to be brave even when it scared him, learning that love didn't have limits, that there was always room for more people in your heart if you were willing to make space. At 11:30, the door to Evelyn's room opened and Mrs. Chen emerged with a satisfied expression. She is ready. You may see her now. Jonah stepped into the room and forgot how to breathe. Evelyn sat in a chair by the window, dressed in a simple blue dress that Mrs. Chen must have lent her. Someone had washed and braided her dark hair, woven small white flowers through it. The frostbite damage was still visible on her face and hands, but somehow it didn't diminish her. If anything, it made her more beautiful, proof of what she'd survived, what she'd endured to be here. She looked up as he entered, and her smile was tremulous. Will I do? You're perfect. I can't stand, can barely move without help. This is probably the least romantic wedding in history. I don't care about romance. I care about you, about us, about starting our life together. He crossed to her, took her hands in his. You could be wearing sackcloth and covered in mud, and you'd still be the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Tears spilled down her cheeks. How do you always know exactly what to say? I'm just telling the truth. A commotion in the hallway announced the arrival of Reverend Parker, a thin man with kind eyes and a Bible worn soft from use. Behind him came what looked like half the town, people crowding into the small room and spilling out into the hall, all wanting to witness this wedding that had become legend before it even happened. The cowboy who rode into a blizzard, the bride who walked through death to keep her promise. Their story had spread through Silver Ridge like wildfire, and now everyone wanted to see how it ended. Reverend Parker positioned himself beside Evelyn's chair while Jonah stood facing her, Toby at his side. The room fell silent, and the Reverend opened his Bible. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to witness the union of Jonah Mallory and Evelyn Hart in holy matrimony. His voice was warm, resonant. This is a blessed occasion, made more so by the remarkable journey these two have taken to reach this moment. He spoke of love and commitment, of the sacred bonds of marriage, of the promises that held even in darkness and storm. Jonah barely heard the words. He was too focused on Evelyn's face, on the way her eyes never left his, on the strength and certainty he saw there despite everything she'd endured. Jonah, do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? To have and to hold, from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do you part? I do. His voice was steady, sure. I absolutely do. And Evelyn, do you take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do you part? I do. Her voice broke on the words, but the conviction was absolute. I do. The rings? Jonah fumbled in his pocket, pulling out a simple gold band that had belonged to his grandmother. He'd retrieved it from the ranch house that morning, the only family heirloom he had left. He slipped it onto Evelyn's finger and it fit perfectly. Evelyn had no ring to give him. How could she, after everything? But she took his hand and pressed it to her heart. I give you this, she said quietly. my heart, my loyalty, my promise to stand beside you through whatever comes. It's all I have, but it's yours. Forever." Jonah's vision blurred. He nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. Reverend Parker smiled. "Then, by the power vested in me by the territory of Colorado and Almighty God, I now pronounce you husband and wife." He paused, his eyes twinkling. "You may kiss your bride." Jonah leaned down and kissed her, gentle and reverent, tasting salt from her tears and feeling her smile against his lips. The room erupted in applause and cheers, but it all faded to background noise. All that mattered was this woman, his wife, and the life they were about to build together. When they finally pulled apart, Evelyn was laughing and crying at the same time. "We did it. We actually did it. Told you I keep my promises." "So you did." The celebration that followed was simple but heartfelt. Mrs. Chen had arranged for a small meal in the boarding house dining room, and the townspeople brought what they could: bread, preserves, a precious bottle of wine someone had been saving. Toby stayed close to Jonah's side, watching Evelyn with cautious curiosity while she spoke with the women who'd helped prepare her. Josiah Patterson approached Jonah with an expression somewhere between respect and disbelief. "Have to admit, Mallory, I didn't think you'd make it. Thought we were planning a funeral, not a wedding. Had to prove you wrong. Glad you did. She seems like good people. Strong. You're going to need that out on the ranch." "I know." Patterson lowered his voice. "The rescue party made it to Blackwood Creek, brought everyone back safe. They're being cared for at the church, weak and hungry, but they'll recover. Your bride saved their lives, you know. If she hadn't left when she did, if she hadn't made it far enough for you to find her trail, we never would have known they were there." Jonah looked across the room to where Evelyn sat, surrounded by chattering women, her face animated despite the obvious pain she was in. "She saved more than their lives. She saved mine, too." "How's that?" "She reminded me what it means to hope, to fight for something, to believe that good things are still possible even after you've lost everything." Jonah shook his head. "I was just going through the motions before her letters started arriving. Taking care of Toby, keeping the ranch running, but not really living. She changed that." Patterson clapped him on the shoulder. "Then you're a lucky man, Jonah Mallory." "Don't I know it?" As afternoon faded toward evening, the townspeople began to drift away, returning to their own lives with stories to tell about the wedding they'd witnessed. Mrs. Bess. Chen helped Evelyn back upstairs while Jonah and Toby followed. "Will she come home with us soon?" Toby asked as they climbed the stairs. "Soon. Another week or two until she can travel safely. But then yes, she'll come home. And she'll stay home with us. Forever." "Forever is a long time." "It is. Think you can handle having a stepmother for that long?" Toby was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. "I think so. She has kind eyes, like Ma did. Different, but kind." "She does." At the top of the stairs, Toby suddenly turned and hugged Jonah tight. "I'm glad you found her, Pa. I'm glad you didn't give up." Jonah held his son close, his heart so full it hurt. "Me too, Toby. Me too." The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of healing and adjustment. Evelyn's feet improved slowly, the angry blisters giving way to new pink skin. She graduated from being completely bedridden to hobbling around the room with Jonah's help, then to making it down the stairs and back up again without stopping to rest. Toby visited every day after his lessons, initially shy, but gradually warming to Evelyn's gentle questions and genuine interest in his life. She asked him to teach her about the ranch, about the animals, about his favorite places to explore. She listened when he talked about his mother without flinching or trying to change the subject. And slowly, carefully, something like trust began to form between them. Jonah watched it happen with a mixture of relief and awe. He'd worried that Toby might resent Evelyn, might see her as a replacement trying to erase Sarah's memory. But instead, his son seemed to understand instinctively that there was room in their family for both the mother he'd lost and the one who'd just arrived. "She's different from Ma," Toby said one evening as he and Jonah walked back to Mrs. Chen's after helping with ranch chores. "Not better or worse, just different." "That's exactly right. Ma used to sing when she cooked. Evelyn doesn't sing, but she tells stories about Boston and books and all the places she's read about. Do you like the stories? Yeah, they make the world seem bigger, like there's more out there than just the ranch and the mountains. Toby kicked at a rock in the road. Is it okay that I like her? That I want her to be part of our family? Jonah's throat tightened. It's more than okay, son. It's what I was hoping for. I still miss Ma, though. I know, so do I, and we always will, but missing her doesn't mean we can't love Evelyn, too. The heart's got room for both. Toby nodded, some tension easing from his small shoulders. Good, because I think I'm starting to. Love her, I mean. Is that too fast? There's no such thing as too fast when it comes to love. You feel what you feel, and that's okay. On the 15th day after the wedding, Doc Morrison declared Evelyn fit to travel. Her feet were still tender, still healing, but she could walk short distances without help, and the risk of infection had passed. You're tougher than you look, Mrs. Mallory, he said with approval. Most people would still be laid up after what you went through, but you're ready to go home. Home. The word made Evelyn's eyes shine with tears. She'd been living in borrowed rooms, wearing borrowed clothes, existing in a state of temporary suspension. But now she could start building the life she'd traveled so far to find. The morning they left Silver Ridge, half the town turned out to see them off. Jonah had borrowed a wagon from Patterson, loading it with supplies and gifts the townspeople had contributed. Quilts, preserves, seeds for spring planting, a rocking chair someone's grandmother had made. For the new Mrs. Mallory, people kept saying as they pressed packages into her hands. Welcome to Colorado. Welcome home. Evelyn accepted each gift with trembling gratitude, overwhelmed by the generosity of people who'd been strangers 2 weeks ago and now felt like family. Mrs. Chen was the last to say goodbye, pressing a small package into Evelyn's hands. For when times are hard, when you think you cannot continue, open and remember, you already survived the impossible. Everything else is easier. Evelyn hugged the old woman tight. Thank you for everything, for taking care of Toby, for believing we'd make it. I believed because Mr. Mallory's eyes said he would die before he failed, and your eyes said the same. Mrs. Chen smiled, rare and genuine. You are matched well, both stubborn as mountains. The ride to the ranch took most of the day, the wagon moving slowly over snow-packed roads. Toby sat between Jonah and Evelyn, pointing out landmarks and chattering about everything they passed. That's where Pa taught me to fish. And that's the tree I fell out of and broke my arm. And over there, that's where we saw the bear last summer. Evelyn listened with rapt attention, asking questions, laughing at his stories, slowly learning the geography of her new home. As they crested the final ridge and the valley opened up below them, Jonah reined in the horses and pointed. There, that's home. Evelyn shaded her eyes against the afternoon sun, looking at the small ranch house nestled in the valley. It was simple, weathered, surrounded by snow and silence. But smoke rose from the chimney Jonah had ridden out the day before to prepare, and cattle dotted the distant meadows, and it was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. It's perfect, she whispered. It's rough, nothing fancy. The house needs work and the barn roof leaks, and it's perfect, she said again, more firmly. It's ours. That makes it perfect. They descended into the valley as the sun touched the western peaks, painting the snow gold and pink. Jonah pulled the wagon up to the house, set the brake, and turned to Evelyn. Ready? More than ready. He helped her down, steadying her when her feet protested the movement. Then, before she could take a step toward the door, he swept her up into his arms. Jonah, what are you? Tradition, he said, grinning. Got to carry my bride over the threshold. I can walk. I know. But I want to do this right. He carried her up the steps and through the door into warmth and firelight. The interior was simple. One main room with a fireplace, kitchen area, table and chairs. 2 doors led to bedrooms. Nothing fancy, like Jonah had said, but it was clean and warm and filled with the promise of everything they'd build together. Jonah set Evelyn down gently, and for a moment they just stood together, looking at their home. Welcome, Toby said from the doorway, suddenly shy again. I helped Pa clean, and I put flowers in your room. They're dried ones from last summer, but I thought you might like them." Evelyn turned to him, her eyes bright with tears. "Can I hug you, Toby? Would that be okay?" The boy hesitated for just a moment, then nodded. Evelyn opened her arms and he walked into them, letting her hold him close. "Thank you," she whispered into his hair, "for giving me a chance, for letting me be part of your family. I promise I'll do my best to be worthy of it." "You already are," Toby said, his voice muffled against her shoulder. "You walked through a blizzard for us. That's pretty worthy." They held each other while Jonah watched, his heart so full it felt like it might burst. This was what he'd hoped for, what he'd prayed for during those desperate days searching through the snow. Not just finding Evelyn alive, but finding a way for them to become a real family. And here it was, imperfect and fragile and more precious than gold. The days that followed fell into a rhythm. Evelyn learned the routines of ranch life, when to feed the animals, how to work the stove, where Jonah kept his tools. She was clumsy at first, her feet still healing and her body still recovering from its ordeal. But she was determined, tackling each task with the same fierce will that had carried her through the blizzard. Toby appointed himself her guide, teaching her everything he knew: how to collect eggs without spooking the hens, how to tell when a cow was about to calve, how to read the sky for coming weather. He was patient with her mistakes and generous with his praise, and Evelyn soaked up his attention like parched earth soaking up rain. At night, after Toby had gone to bed, Jonah and Evelyn would sit by the fire and talk about their days, about their dreams, about all the small details that made up a life. Sometimes they'd read aloud from Evelyn's battered copy of Whitman. Sometimes they'd just sit in comfortable silence, her feet in his lap while he massaged feeling back into them. "Are you happy?" Jonah asked one night, maybe a month after she'd arrived. Evelyn looked up from the sock she was darning, one of Toby's that had more hole than sock. "Happier than I've ever been. Why?" I worry sometimes that this isn't what you expected, that maybe you're disappointed." "Disappointed?" She set down the darning and looked at him seriously. "Jonah, I spent 30 years in Boston feeling like I was drowning, like I didn't fit anywhere, didn't belong to anyone. And now I have this home, this family, this life. How could I possibly be disappointed? It's hard work, the ranch, the isolation, I know, and I love it, all of it." She reached for his hand. "I love waking up to silence instead of city noise. I love looking out the window and seeing mountains instead of buildings. I love that when I work hard, I can see the results. Clean house, fed animals, happy child." She smiled. "I love that I matter here, that what I do makes a difference. You've always mattered. Not like this. In Boston, I was just extra. One more mouth to feed, one more spinster taking up space. Here, I'm necessary, wanted, loved. You are. God, Evelyn, you are." They kissed, and it felt like coming home in a way that had nothing to do with walls or roofs and everything to do with finding the person who made you whole. Spring came gradually, the snow melting to reveal brown earth and the first brave shoots of new grass. Evelyn's feet healed completely, leaving only faint scars as a reminder of what she'd endured. She could walk without pain now, could work from dawn to dusk without needing to rest. The ranch began to thrive under their combined efforts. Jonah handled the heavy work, mending fences, breaking horses, managing the cattle. Evelyn ran the household with quiet efficiency, but she also surprised him with how much she learned. She could handle a team of horses, could shoot well enough to bring down game for dinner, could work alongside him in the fields when extra hands were needed. "You're tougher than most ranch hands I've known," he told her one evening as they worked together to repair the barn roof. "Had a good teacher and strong motivation." "What's that?" "Not wanting to be useless, wanting to pull my weight." She hammered a nail with satisfying precision. "And wanting to prove to myself that I'm not the delicate Boston flower everyone thought I was. Nobody who walked through a blizzard could be called delicate. You'd be surprised. Some people still see me as the poor rescued bride who can't possibly handle real ranch work." "Who?" "Some of the women in town. They mean well, but they keep trying to teach me embroidery and china painting. Things a proper rancher's wife should know." She snorted. As if china painting will help when a cow needs pulling or a fence needs mending, Jonah grinned. You could always show them up, invite them for tea and serve it while wearing your work clothes and smelling like the barn. Don't tempt me. They worked in companionable silence for a while, the evening sun warm on their backs. Then Evelyn paused, hammer in hand, and looked at him seriously. Jonah, can I ask you something? Anything. Do you ever wish things had been different, that you'd met me some other way, that our story had been less dramatic? He considered the question, really thought about it. No, I don't. Because if things had been different, you might not be here. I might not have found you. We might have missed each other entirely. But if we'd met normally, I wouldn't have almost died. You wouldn't have had to risk your life. Toby wouldn't have had to worry about losing another parent. True, but we also wouldn't have known, wouldn't have proven, what we're capable of, what we mean to each other. He set down his tools and took her hands. The storm tested us before we'd even really begun. And we passed. We know now that we can survive anything. That's worth something. You think we needed to almost die to know we were right for each other? I think we needed to face the worst together, so we'd never doubt we could handle the rest. Whatever comes, drought, harsh winters, hard times, we'll face it knowing we've already survived worse. Evelyn nodded slowly. When you put it like that, I guess I wouldn't change it either, even though it was terrifying, even though I still sometimes wake up cold and think I'm back in that snow. Do you? Have nightmares? Sometimes, don't you? Yeah. Dream about finding you too late, about riding for days and never seeing a trace, about, his voice roughened, about losing you before I really had you. But you didn't. You found me. We made it. We did. They finished the roof as the sun set, then climbed down and stood together looking at their ranch. The house with smoke curling from the chimney, the barn with its new roof, the fields waiting for spring planting, the mountains standing eternal against the darkening sky. It's ours, Evelyn said softly. Really ours. I keep having to remind myself. Believe it, you're home. This is where you belong. With you. With me. With Toby. With all of this. They walked back to the house hand in hand, and Jonah thought about how far they'd come. From strangers writing careful letters to this, partnership built on trust and tested by fire, or in their case by ice and snow and the very real possibility of death. Inside, Toby was setting the table for dinner, humming under his breath. He looked up when they entered, his face lighting up. "Ma made stew," he said, then froze. His eyes went wide, horrified. "I mean, Evelyn made stew. I didn't mean to call her. I'm sorry. Evelyn crossed the room and knelt in front of him, taking his face in her hands. "Toby, look at me. Look at me." He did, tears already forming. "It's okay. More than okay. If you want to call me Ma, you can. I'd be honored. But my real Ma is always going to be your real mother. Nothing changes that. But love doesn't run out, sweetheart. There's room in your heart for both of us. And if you want me to be your Ma too, your second Ma, I'd love that." Toby's face crumpled, and he threw his arms around her neck, sobbing. "I miss her. I miss her so much. But I love you too, and I feel bad about it, and I don't know what to do." "Oh, honey." Evelyn held him tight, rocking slightly. "You don't have to choose. You can miss her and love me, both at the same time. That's allowed." Jonah watched them, his own eyes burning. This moment, this was what healing looked like. Not forgetting, not replacing. Just making room for new love alongside the old. Eventually, Toby's sobs quieted. He pulled back, wiping his eyes with his sleeve. "You really don't mind? If I call you Ma?" "I'd be honored," Evelyn said again. "Truly." "Okay." He took a shaky breath. "Okay. Ma." The word hung in the air, and Evelyn's face transformed with joy. "Okay. Son?" They hugged again, and Jonah joined them, wrapping his arms around both of them. His family, broken and mended and stronger for it. Years passed. The ranch prospered. Jonah and Evelyn built onto the house, adding rooms as their family grew. First one child, then another. Toby grew tall and strong, eventually taking over more of the ranch work. He never forgot his first mother, but he loved Evelyn with the fierce devotion of a boy who'd been given a second chance at maternal love. The story of their meeting became legend in Silver Ridge and beyond. The cowboy who rode into a blizzard, the bride who walked through death itself. People would ask them to tell it, especially on winter nights when snow fell thick and the wind howled. And every year, on the anniversary of the day Jonah found her in the snow, they would ride out together to the line shack where he'd brought her back from the edge of death. They'd sit together in front of a fire, holding hands, remembering. "If you hadn't come," Evelyn said one year, maybe 20 winters after it had all happened. They were older now, gray threading through their hair, lines deepening around their eyes, but they still fit together like they'd been carved from the same stone. "I would have searched every winter until I did," Jonah said, the same answer he always gave. "Couldn't have stopped myself. I know, that's what I counted on. Even when I was so cold I couldn't feel my feet anymore, couldn't remember why I was walking, some part of me knew you wouldn't give up, knew you'd come." "How could I not? You're my whole world. And you're mine." They sat in silence, watching the fire. Outside, the wind sang the same song it had sung that first terrible night. But they were warm and safe and together, and that made all the difference. "Do you ever regret it?" Evelyn asked. "The hardship of those first years, the struggle?" "Not for a second. Every hard day just proved we could handle the next one. We've built something good here, haven't we? We've built something extraordinary, not just the ranch, the family, the life." Jonah pulled her close. "We took two broken people and made them whole. Took a child's grief and gave it room to heal. Took strangers and made them into something that matters. All because of a blizzard. All because we refused to give up, on each other, on hope, on the possibility that maybe, just maybe, good things could still happen even after everything had gone wrong." Evelyn turned to kiss him, and it still felt like coming home, like safety, like everything they'd fought for and won. "I love you," she whispered. "I loved you in your letters. I loved you when you pulled me from the snow. I love you now. And I'll love you until the day I die, and probably beyond that too." "Good," Jonah said, his voice rough with emotion, "because I'm not letting you go, not in this life or the next." They held each other as the fire burned low and night settled over the mountains. Outside, snow began to fall again, gentle this time. A reminder of what they'd survived and what they'd built from the ashes of that survival. Their story would be told for generations in these mountains. The mail-order bride who never came. The cowboy who refused to believe she was lost. The blizzard that nearly killed them both but instead forged them into something unbreakable. But for Jonah and Evelyn, sitting in that lined shack with decades of love and laughter and hard-won happiness behind them, the story was simpler than all that. It was just two people who'd found each other against impossible odds and decided that some promises were worth keeping no matter the cost. Some loves were worth walking through death to claim. Some lives were worth building even when the foundation was nothing but frozen ground and stubborn hope. They'd taken those raw materials and built something that would outlast them both. A family. A ranch. A legacy of choosing love even when it would have been easier to choose safety. And as they rode home through the falling snow, Evelyn's hand in his, Jonah thought about all the years still ahead. More winters, more springs, more chances to prove that the best things in life are the ones you fight for. The ones you refuse to let go of, even when everyone says it's impossible. The ones you find half frozen in the snow and carry home to a life neither of you could have imagined, but both of you deserved. He squeezed Evelyn's hand, and she squeezed back. They were home. They were together. They were exactly where they were meant to be. And that was everything.